Before there was an empire, there was a world unlike any we know today. Inhospitable mountain ranges, freezing peaks, and isolated valleys. How did a civilization rise to greatness in a land so unforgiving? Today, we'll uncover what made the Andes both the greatest challenge and the strongest foundation for the Inca Empire. Long before the Inca Empire dominated the Andes, the region nurtured a tapestry of civilizations, each leaving an enduring mark on the land and its people. Among the earliest were the Chavín, whose cultural influence began more than 2,500 years before the rise of the Inca. Centered at Chavín de Huántar, their society built intricate temples and sculpted stone carvings of mythical creatures, blending human and animal forms. As the Chavín influence waned, societies like the Moche, 100 to 700 CE, flourished along the arid northern coast. The Moche were master engineers, building extensive irrigation systems that transformed deserts into fertile plains. Their iconic huacas, stepped pyramid temples like the Huaca del Sol, served as centers for ceremonies and governance. Artistic craftsmanship also reached new heights under the Moche, with intricate pottery depicting scenes of everyday life, myths, and even surgical procedures. In fact, Moche leaders demonstrated advanced medical knowledge, performing brain surgeries or trepanation with tools as primitive as obsidian knives. Astonishingly, many patients survived these operations, demonstrating a level of medical sophistication that far exceeded some 19th century surgical practices. Further south, the Nazca culture left its own enduring legacy. Between 200 BCE and 600 CE, they designed vast geoglyphs, massive drawings etched into the arid earth, representing animals, plants, and geometric shapes. These Nazca lines, visible only from the sky, remain shrouded in mystery. Were they paths for ceremonial pilgrimages, messages to the gods, or astronomical markers? While their purpose is debated, the lines highlight the remarkable achievements of pre-Inca societies in their ability to manipulate and interact with landscapes on a monumental scale. Around the same period, in the Andean highlands, the Tiwanaku culture thrived near the shores of Lake Titicaca. Known for their monumental stonework, Tiwanaku engineers constructed massive temples and urban centers without mortar, using a precision that defies comprehension. Their planning extended to agricultural innovation as well. They developed raised fields surrounding Lake Titicaca, leveraging a network of canals that retained heat from the sun, protecting crops from frost. This ingenuity allowed cultivation in one of the most extreme climates in the world. The Wari Empire, 600 to 1100 CE, often considered the greatest direct precursor to the Inca, brought further advancements. Centered near modern Ayacucho, the Wari introduced organizational practices still visible in the Inca system centuries later. These beliefs embedded humans within a sacred landscape, reinforcing both survival and spirituality, in a region where natural forces could either provide abundance or provoke disaster. The foundation of this principle, known as Aini, helped knit communities together across the vast landscapes of deserts, valleys, and mountains. By the time the Inca began their rise in the 13th century, they inherited tools, ideas, and practices from societies long vanished, yet far from forgotten. Thousands of years of cultural and technological ingenuity, from Nazca geoglyphs to Moche irrigation canals, Wari roads, and Tiwanaku stonework, created fertile ground for the birth of the largest empire the Americas had ever known. Without that rich pre-Inca legacy, the achievements of the Inca might never have come to fruition. The Andes Mountains dominate South America's western edge, stretching over 7,000 kilometers from Venezuela to Chile. This range, one of the world's longest, profoundly shaped the Inca Empire. These peaks, often towering above 6,000 meters, forced the Incas to adapt their lives to both the harshness and the abundance of this diverse terrain. Unlike the flat vastness of other regions, the Andes offer dramatic contrasts: arid deserts, fertile valleys, snowy summits, and tropical forests, all connected within a vertical world where altitude dictated life. For the Andean people, verticality wasn't just a feature of the landscape. It became the framework of society and survival. They lived in ecological tiers, relying on what anthropologists call vertical archipelagos. Families or communities accessed multiple climate zones to harvest different crops, from maize and potatoes at higher altitudes to cacao and tropical fruits in the lower jungles. These connections between highland and lowland ensured that even in this challenging environment, Incan society would thrive and avoid over-reliance on any singular resource. Their efficient system of moving goods and ideas made them masters of vertical integration, centuries before the concept would gain modern recognition. Certain natural landmarks across the Andes held immense significance to the Incas, both practically and spiritually. Lake Titicaca, for instance, is the world's highest navigable lake, sitting over 3,800 meters above sea level. According to legend, it was from this lake that the first Inca ruler, Manco Capac, and his sister wife, Mama Oclo, were born, sent by the sun god to bring order to the earth. Beyond mythology, the lake's shores served as fertile agricultural zones and a cultural nexus for centuries. Similarly, the Altiplano, a high plateau near the lake, was vital for llama grazing. Farther north, the Sacred Valley near Cusco provided a key breadbasket for the empire. Its relatively moderate climate and proximity to essential trade routes made it an ideal location for both farming and settlement. For the Incas, the geography of the Andes wasn't random, it was purposeful, tightly woven into their religious beliefs and political strategy. This challenging environment also demanded a level of ingenuity unmatched in the pre-Columbian Americas. To adapt to steep mountain slopes, the Incas developed terraces supported by carefully constructed retaining walls that turned hillsides into productive farmland. Their sophisticated draining systems reduced erosion and allowed crops like quinoa and potatoes to flourish where cultivation might otherwise seem impossible. The high Andes allowed for novel food storage techniques, such as freeze-drying, discussed further in the agriculture section. Even more remarkable were the roads and bridges that stitched the empire together, stretching for thousands of kilometers across some of the most forbidding landscapes on Earth. These roads often clung to sheer cliffs or wound through high mountain passes, connecting sea-level deserts to cloud forests. Without the aid of wheels or extensive draft animals, the llama was their only pack animal. The Incas managed trade and communication with incredible efficiency. Expert runners called Chasquis used these roads to deliver messages across the empire, relaying information quickly over vast distances. Additionally, suspension bridges crafted from woven grasses spanned deep gorges, serving as lifelines across otherwise impassable areas. Mountains themselves weren't merely obstacles or lifeless formations. To the Incas, these towering peaks were alive. They believed the mountains, known as apus, were sacred deities responsible for guarding the land and influencing human fortune. Offerings were made to these apus to ensure good harvests, protection, and balance within nature. This spiritual relationship between geography and human existence made every valley, summit, and trail part of a sacred interconnected world. The Andes shaped not only the practical aspects of Inca life, but also their identity, their innovation, and their resilience. They turned challenges into opportunities, crafting a civilization that thrived where few others could. In these mountains, science and spirituality were inseparable, and geography was more than a stage, it was the heart of an empire. The origin of the Inca people begins with myth, divine intervention, and sacred landscapes. One story tells of a wondrous beginning at Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world. From its shimmering waters, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo rose. Sent by Inti, the sun god, their mission was clear: bestow order upon humanity, teach agriculture, and establish laws. Guided by divine purpose, they journeyed to find fertile land, where they would lay the foundation of civilization. This myth wasn't just about beginnings, it offered an explanation for the Incas' divine claim over the Andes. Another version of their origin takes us to Tambo Toco, a cave near Pacaritambo, where legend says the first Incas emerged from the earth itself. The story describes 3 windows in the cave, often interpreted as symbolic portals where ancestors of various Inca kin groups, Ayllus, entered the world. Manco Capac and his siblings, born from the principal window, were chosen by the gods to lead mankind. Emerging from the womb of the earth tied the Inca lineage to Pachamama, the Andean mother of life and fertility, further linking their rule to spiritual forces that govern land and nature. These locations, like Titicaca and Tambo Toco, were not mere settings for myths. They became pilgrimage sites and critical elements of Inca identity, woven into their tapestry of sacred geography. These myths reinforced the Incas' divine connection to Inti, the sun god, whose central role in Inca religion is explored further later. The Incas declared themselves Inti Churin, or Sons of the Sun, a title that legitimized their divine right to rule. By tracing their ancestry to Inti, the Sapa Inca, the supreme ruler, was seen not as an ordinary leader, but as a living god. His authority wasn't just political, it was sacred. This belief in the divine descent of the Sapa Inca provided cohesion within the empire, compelling loyalty from newly conquered tribes who might otherwise resist unification. Sun worship permeated every aspect of Inca religion, solidifying their connection to Inti. The Coricancha, or Golden Temple, stood as the empire's most sacred space in Cusco. Its walls, once covered with sheets of reflective gold, were designed to honor the sun god. The temple's construction aligned perfectly with the solstices and equinoxes, turning it into a celestial compass. On key dates, sunlight would pierce through windows, illuminating statues and altars, symbolizing the union between heaven and earth. This precision wasn't accidental. It underscored the Incas' ability to merge religious devotion with mathematical and astronomical understanding. What makes these myths even more fascinating is how elements of historical truth hide within the tales. Modern studies reveal that the migratory routes described in origin stories match patterns of early Andean settlement and expansion. Tambo Toco, for example, likely reflects real historical migration during the formation of the Inca state. Archaeological evidence of settlements and ceremonial sites along these mythic paths suggests the stories served as encoded histories, passed down orally to preserve not only beliefs, but a record of their rise as a people. These narratives also functioned as tools of empire. For the Incas, uniting the diverse cultures of the Andes wasn't just a matter of roads and armies. It required a shared identity. By presenting themselves as descendants of Inti, tasked by divine command to bring civilization, they cast their rule as natural and inevitable. They weren't conquerors, they were chosen. The origin myths framed Cusco, their capital, as the navel of the world, a divine preordained center from which their authority radiated outward. Through these myths, the Incas claimed an unbreakable relationship between humanity, the earth, and the cosmos itself. They weren't just rulers of land, but custodians of a sacred order, weaving a legacy that linked their power to the sun and the natural forces that dominated Andean life. The founding of Cusco begins with one of the most enduring legends in Inca history. It is said that Manco Capac, the first ruler, was guided by a golden staff gifted by the sun god Inti. As he searched for a place to settle, the staff sank perfectly into the earth at a site in the Andean highlands. This marked the divine location of Cusco and signaled it as the spiritual and political center of what would become the Inca world. This act wasn't just about determining geography, it carried a profound cosmic symbolism, connecting humanity to the will of the gods. Cusco was not built haphazardly. Its layout mirrored an intricate cosmology, designed with intention and meaning. Viewed from above, ancient Cusco was shaped like a puma, an animal revered by the Incas for its strength, agility, and connection to the spiritual world. The city's head was Sacsayhuaman, a massive fortress built from enormous polygonal stones. Each stone weighed several tons, and to this day, the precision with which they were cut and fitted together without the use of mortar defies explanation. This fortress wasn't merely a military stronghold, it symbolized power and protection, as if the puma itself safeguarded the capital. At the center of the puma's body, and symbolically the empire, stood the Coricancha, or the Temple of the Sun. This wasn't just any temple. It was the most sacred site in the empire, a space built to honor Inti, the sun god, who was the lifeblood of Inca spirituality. The walls of Coricancha were once covered in gold, meant to reflect the brilliance of the sun. The temple served not only as a religious center, but as a physical and spiritual compass. It connected the sky, the earth, and humanity through its precise alignment with the solstices and equinoxes. At key moments of the solar calendar, rays of sunlight would illuminate its ceremonial altars, symbolizing harmony between nature and the divine. Cusco's organization went beyond symbolism. The city was divided into 4 quarters, corresponding to the 4 Suyus, or regions, of the empire. These quarters met at the Coricancha, emphasizing that Cusco was the navel of the world, Cusco in the Quechua language. This design wasn't just spiritual, it created an administrative hub, with each Suyu contributing resources and labor to sustain the empire. The layout of Cusco turned the city into a microcosm of the empire itself, blending political and religious authority into a seamless structure. Cusco's construction highlighted some of the most advanced stoneworking techniques of its time. The giant blocks of stone used in its buildings were transported across great distances and meticulously shaped to interlock perfectly. Despite centuries of earthquakes that toppled colonial structures later built atop these foundations, much of the original Inca stonework still stands. One particularly famous example is the 12-angled stone, a single block so precisely fitted into a wall that its edges seem impossibly clean even today. This mastery of engineering created an enduring legacy, often considered unmatched in the pre-Columbian world. What lies beneath Cusco is nearly as fascinating as what was built above. Beneath the modern city exists a network of tunnels, chambers, and passageways believed to date back to pre-Hispanic times. These subterranean features are largely unexplored, adding an aura of mystery to Cusco's history. Some legends claim these tunnels connected Sacsayhuaman to the Coricancha and other sacred sites, offering secret paths that only the elite or priests could traverse. While these tales might stretch into myth, the fragments of tunnels uncovered so far suggest the Incas had an extraordinary understanding of both surface and underground construction. The founding of Cusco wasn't just about creating a city. It was about establishing a divine and earthly axis. From its cosmological design to its engineering brilliance, Cusco reflected the Incas' ability to unite their spiritual beliefs and practical needs. It wasn't simply a capital, but a reflection of their universe, a place where gods, humans, and nature converged into a harmonious whole. After Manco Capac established Cusco as the Inca heartland, his successors began the gradual work of building a society that could thrive in the challenging Andean environment. These early rulers are often described as semi-legendary figures, existing somewhere between history and myth, yet their actions laid crucial foundations for what would one day become an empire. Sinchi-Roca, the son of Manco Capac, is remembered for his relatively peaceful rule. Instead of focusing on large-scale conquests, he worked to expand agricultural practices in the Cusco Valley, ensuring a stable food supply for his growing community. He also began the tradition of using marriage alliances to strengthen ties with neighboring groups, a pattern that would later define Inca diplomacy. Loque Yupanqui, the third ruler, followed his predecessor's path by continuing efforts to consolidate power within the immediate region, rather than pursuing broader expansion. His reign saw improvements in local irrigation systems, which allowed for greater agricultural efficiency in the valley's high-altitude terrain. Oral histories often describe his attempts to assert authority over nearby tribes, though these efforts often led to skirmishes rather than full domination. During this time, Cusco functioned less as an empire and more as a small city-state, surrounded by potential rivals and allies. It wasn't until the time of Maita Capac, the fourth ruler, that the Incas began to show flashes of their future ambitions. A skilled warrior and leader, Maita Capac expanded Inca influence beyond the immediate valley through military campaigns, albeit on a modest scale. He directed the construction of early fortifications around Cusco, signaling an increased focus on defense and the possibility of territorial conflict. These steps, while incremental, foreshadowed the militarized strategy that the Inca would later perfect in their rise to power. The turning point in early Inca history arrived with Inca Roca, a ruler credited with formalizing the structures that would define the state. He is famously associated with the establishment of Yachayhuasi, or houses of learning, which provided education for the sons of the Inca nobility. These institutions taught not only the religious and administrative knowledge needed to govern, but also emphasized the importance of oral history. Without a written language, the Incas preserved their past through storytelling, songs, and quipus, a complex system of knotted strings used for record-keeping. Scholars today still struggle to fully decode the quipus, underscoring how advanced yet enigmatic Inca knowledge systems were. Inca Roca's reign also marked the beginnings of a centralized administrative approach. While earlier rulers focused largely on survival and local stability, he prioritized strengthening the political and religious cohesion of the growing state. Nobles were given defined roles, and rituals became a key way to reinforce social order. This era saw the building blocks of organized religion and a distinct Inca nobility taking shape, unifying the people under shared customs and beliefs. As the Incas dealt with neighboring tribes, one of their persistent adversaries was the Chancas, a formidable group whose military power rivaled the early Inca forces. The constant threat of attack forced the Incas to refine their military organization and sharpen their strategies. These repeated clashes, while not always successful for the Incas, tested their resilience and prepared them for larger campaigns in the coming centuries. Capac Yupanqui, an early Inca leader known for his ambitious nature, led one of the first recorded expeditions beyond the Cusco Valley. This demonstrated a shift in mindset from defensive consolidation to proactive regional exploration and conquest. What's remarkable about this period is not the scale of the Incas' achievements, but how methodically they built the systems they would later need. Roads were constructed to connect their small territory, allowing for the movement of goods and people. Alliances were formed, whether through diplomacy or force, ensuring a steady network of support in times of need. Rituals, from seasonal festivals to ancestor worship, strengthened the sense of unity within the community. This slow and steady accumulation of infrastructure, knowledge, and alliances would eventually erupt into the massive expansion that defined the Inca Empire. The early rulers may not have built an empire, but they built the tools of empire. Through their efforts, the small, isolated city-state of Cusco transformed into a resilient regional power, ready for the seismic changes that the Andes would soon witness. This was a time of preparation, of laying roads, shaping minds, and planting the seeds of conquest that would one day span the Andean mountains. Inca religion revolved around a deep reverence for nature and the cosmos. Their belief system was polytheistic, with an intricate hierarchy of deities, each connected to essential elements of the natural world. At the center of their worship was Inti, the sun god, considered the bringer of life and the spiritual father of the Inca rulers. To the Inca, Inti's radiance was more than light. It was a divine force that ensured a bountiful harvest and maintained balance in the universe. Alongside Inti stood Pachamama, Earth Mother, a nurturing but unpredictable deity who governed fertility, agriculture, and the mountains. Illapa, the god of thunder and weather, controlled rainfall, making him critical in such a challenging environment. This interconnected pantheon reflected the Inca understanding of their surroundings, where every natural event carried spiritual significance. Religion was inseparable from everyday life. Farming, the backbone of Inca society, required the favor of the gods to succeed. Before planting a single seed, rituals were performed to ensure Pachamama's blessings, and offerings were made in gratitude for her sustenance. Warfare, too, demanded divine approval, with ceremonies held to consult oracles and seek signs of favor from the gods. These traditions infused even the simplest routines, such as eating or traveling, with spiritual meaning, tying the people's actions to the divine cycle of life. Huacas, physical and symbolic representations of the sacred, served as spiritual focal points across the empire. These could be natural features such as a mountain, rock formation, or spring, or they could be man-made shrines, often intricate and deliberately placed within the landscape. Huacas were not passive symbols, they were active participants in the spiritual world, and often believed to house the spirits of ancestors or gods. Rituals performed at these sites frequently involved offerings of food, textiles, or precious objects, ensuring the continued harmony between humans and their environment. The Incas placed huacas in precise locations, creating a network of sacred spaces that connected physical geography with their divine cosmology. One of the grandest expressions of Inca religion was their festivals, with Inti Raymi being the most prominent. Celebrated during the winter solstice, this festival of the sun marked the year's shortest day and the symbolic rebirth of Inti. The entire empire prepared for the event, which took place in Cusco at the Coricancha temple in the main plaza. Thousands gathered to witness processions of priests, musicians, and dancers clad in vibrant ceremonial attire. Llamas were sacrificed, and offerings of chicha, a fermented maize drink, were made to ensure the sun god's continued favor. The festival was more than an act of devotion. It was a renewal of the social and cosmic order, reinforcing the connection between the emperor, the people, and the divine. Rituals also extended to more somber occasions, like Capac, a form of human sacrifice practiced during extraordinary circumstances. This ceremony often involved children considered pure and unblemished. After months of preparation, these sacrifices were carried out at high-altitude huacas, offering the lives of the chosen few to maintain the balance of the world during events like natural disasters or royal transitions. Archaeological evidence, such as preserved child mummies found near mountaintop huacas, reveals the profound care taken in these ceremonies. The children were dressed in fine garments and surrounded by prized objects like gold and silver figurines, reflecting the gravity and reverence of the act. Priests and oracle shrines were at the heart of Inca ritual life. The shamans and priests interpreted the will of the gods and maintained both local and imperial religious customs. Certain oracles, like Pachacuti on the coast, held immense power and influence. Leaders made pilgrimages to consult these shrines, which served as special advisors and political tools. By controlling access to divine guidance, the Inca religious elite strengthened the authority of the ruler and maintained unity across a vast empire. What's remarkable is how the Incas wove astronomical understanding into their religious framework. Temples and cities were aligned with celestial events, turning the Andes into a ritual landscape. The Coricancha in Cusco, for example, was designed to align perfectly with solstices and equinoxes, acting as both a calendar and a bridge to the divine. This fusion of science and spirituality allowed the Incas to organize their world with precision and purpose, leaving behind a legacy where religion was more than belief. It was the framework of their civilization. At the heart of Inca society was the Ayllu, a tight-knit kinship group that served as the foundation of both daily life and the empire's larger structure. These extended family units shared land, labor, and resources, working together to ensure their collective survival. Far from being just a familial group, each Ayllu functioned like a self-contained community, managing its own agricultural fields, herding grounds, and religious duties. Every member of an Ayllu was bound by reciprocal obligations, helping one another during planting and harvest, celebrating festivals together, or pooling resources in times of need. This model of mutual support extended upward, ensuring stability within the broader empire. Each Ayllu was led by a curaca, a local leader who acted as a mediator between the community and the state. It was the curaca's responsibility to oversee land distribution, resolve disputes, and manage the community's obligations to the Inca government. Curacas were also essential religious figures, tying the Ayllu to its own deity and ancestral traditions. Every Ayllu had sacred lands or rituals closely tied to local gods or huacas, emphasizing the spiritual connection between the people and the environment they inhabited. For the Incas, control of local Ayllus through their curacas allowed the empire to integrate diverse ethnic groups without dismantling their traditional ways of life, a balance that would become one of their most effective strategies for governance. The Inca economy revolved around an ingenious division of land that ensured resources were distributed equitably, while also sustaining the empire's vast administrative structure. Land was split into three main parts. 1/3 was assigned to the state, used to support government projects, infrastructure, and the army. Another third was dedicated to the sun god, supplying resources for temples, rituals, and ceremonies. The final portion was allocated to the Ayllu itself, to be worked and shared among its members. This system was designed to maintain harmony, ensuring that every part of society, state, religion, and people was supported by the land. Instead of taxation in the form of currency, labor was the true foundation of the Inca economy. The mita system, a state-mandated labor obligation, was central to maintaining Inca infrastructure and governance. Each member of an Ayllu contributed a portion of their labor to state projects, such as building roads, farming state land, or working on monumental architecture. This wasn't viewed as a burden, but as a natural extension of the reciprocal obligations that already structured Inca society. In turn, the state provided protection, stored surplus food for times of famine, and ensured the operation of public works like aqueducts and agricultural terraces. Mita wasn't just a labor system. It was a social contract that tied unity and productivity to survival. Ayllus also played a critical role in food security through an economic concept known as the vertical archipelago. Andean geography, defined by sharp contrasts in altitude, created distinct ecological zones capable of producing entirely different resources. Through careful management, Ayllus maintained access to multiple zones, allowing them to provide a diversity of goods from their own lands. For instance, an Ayllu might control fields of maize at lower elevations, while also tending to llama herds in high-altitude pastures. This strategic resource management allowed Andean communities to thrive in what might otherwise be seen as an unforgiving environment. Notably, the Inca Empire operated without money. Instead, its economy relied entirely on reciprocity. Labor, not currency, was the primary exchange, and goods and services circulated within a tightly organized system of redistribution. This approach fostered a sense of collective responsibility, with the Ayllu acting as the building block for this immense interconnected economy. Even today, some Ayllus in remote Andean regions continue to practice this communal way of life, preserving traditions that have survived colonialism and the pressures of modernization. The true strength of the Inca Empire wasn't in its armies, roads, or wealth. It was in its Ayllu-based social fabric. This deep-rooted structure anchored the empire, enabling diverse cultures to coexist and contribute to a centralized state while maintaining their local customs. It was the Ayllu, the familial and communal nucleus of Andean civilization, that provided the cohesion and loyalty necessary to govern such a vast and diverse empire. Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui is widely regarded as the true architect of the Inca Empire. Before his reign, the Incas were a regional kingdom, its influence largely contained within the Cusco Valley. By the time his rule ended in 1471, Pachacuti had transformed that small kingdom into a thriving centralized state, with ambitions reaching far beyond its original borders. His name, which translates to Earthshaker, or He Who Overturns Space and Time, reflects the magnitude of change he brought, both through military conquest and his sweeping vision for the future of the empire. Pachacuti's rise to power wasn't born from a time of peace. It began during a moment of crisis. Around 1438, the Chanca, a powerful rival people, launched an invasion targeting the heart of Inca territory. The The Chanca force overwhelmed the Inca defenses, and many, including the then ruler Viracocha Inca, fled Cusco. Pachacuti, who was still a young prince at the time, refused to abandon the city. Organizing a swift and desperate defense, he rallied the remaining forces, enlisted support from local allies, and devised a counterattack. The result was a shocking victory over the Chanca, transforming Pachacuti from a little-known royal figure into the hero of Cusco. This triumph allowed him to claim the throne, and his leadership ushered in a period of unprecedented transformation. In the years that followed his ascent, Pachacuti set his sights far beyond survival. His mind was as focused on internal reform as it was on external conquest. First, he reorganized Cusco itself. He redesigned the city into a grand symbol of imperial power, reflecting the cosmos through its layout. Roads radiated outward like the lines of a great spiderweb, connecting Cusco to the farthest reaches of its growing territories. These radial pathways mirrored the check system Pachacuti is credited with developing, a conceptual framework that mapped political, religious, and geographic networks across hundreds of sacred sites, or huacas. Every element of the empire symbolically led back to Cusco, reinforcing its role as the navel of the Andean world and the seat of divine authority. Aside from reorganizing the physical space of Cusco, Pachacuti also created the foundations of a centralized bureaucracy. He introduced a structured administrative system that divided the empire into 4 regions, or Suyus, each governed with precision. This system not only facilitated governance over the sprawling lands, but also allowed for the integration of diverse conquered peoples. Instead of obliterating local traditions, Pachacuti's administration incorporated them, blending them into the broader framework of Inca rule. Such careful management ensured loyalty and cooperation across the empire. Pachacuti also reimagined the empire's relationship with religion. By centralizing and standardizing worship around Inti, the sun god, he reinforced the idea that the Sapa Inca was a divine figure on earth. This unified religious structure strengthened the cultural ties between newly conquered peoples and the existing Inca population, helping to integrate vast territories under a shared spiritual banner. Machu Picchu, a stunning royal estate attributed to Pachacuti's reign, likely embodies these ideals. Isolated high in the Andes, this site demonstrates the Inca's ability to fuse spiritual significance with monumental construction, combining practical ingenuity and sacred symbolism. His conquests, reforms, and vision were not merely about ruling vast lands, but about transforming them. Under Pachacuti, monumental construction projects surged, from fortresses like Sacsayhuaman to new administrative centers and agricultural terraces. The empire's road system expanded dramatically, connecting distant regions and ensuring the efficient movement of troops, goods, and messages. This infrastructure solidified the empire's grip on its territories and laid the groundwork for further expansion. Pachacuti's legacy is as much about his intellectual and spiritual vision as his military campaigns. By conceptualizing his empire through check lines and cosmic principles, he didn't just build an empire, he defined it, linking its political and religious foundations in a way that would endure long after his reign. The Inca military was an extension of the empire itself, meticulously organized, deeply rooted in the structure of society, and driven by both practical and sacred goals. Under Pachacuti and his successors, conscription ensured that every able-bodied man from the Ayllus contributed to the state's defense and expansion. This wasn't an imposition, but a way for individuals to fulfill their obligations within the broader framework of the empire. Soldiers trained rigorously and were equipped with weapons suited to the rugged Andean terrain, such as slings, clubs, and spears. The Inca military wasn't just a collection of fighters, it was a well-oiled machine, integrating discipline, infrastructure, and ideology. For the Incas, warfare was never seen as simple territorial conquest. It was a sacred duty. Their expansion was framed as the divine responsibility of the Sapa Inca, who acted as the earthly representative of Inti, the sun god. Conquering new lands was justified as spreading the realm of Inti and bringing order to regions perceived as chaotic or rebellious. This spiritual dimension emboldened troops and gave a sense of higher purpose to every campaign. War was not just about acquiring land or resources, it was about fulfilling a cosmic mission. Before launching an attack, diplomacy was often employed as a first measure. The Incas preferred to absorb new territories peacefully and would send envoys to neighboring leaders, offering gifts, alliances, or high-status positions within the empire. Marriages between Inca nobility and local leaders' families helped cement these agreements, creating personal and political ties. In exchange, the conquered elites retained some authority over their people, though always under the watchful eye of imperial administrators. When this diplomatic approach succeeded, the empire seamlessly expanded without excessive bloodshed. However, refusal to submit meant war, and the Incas did not hesitate to unleash their full strength when diplomacy failed. On the battlefield, the Inca army was a force to be reckoned with, employing tactics as strategic as they were brutal. Psychological warfare often preceded physical engagement. Confrontations opened with deafening battle music, conch shells, drums, and horns, designed to disorient and terrify opponents. Overwhelming numbers often sealed the enemy's fate, as the Incas could mobilize enormous forces, combining local militias with their core troops. Estimates suggest that at their height, the Inca military could field up to 200,000 soldiers, an extraordinary demonstration of state organization. For those who resisted, the consequences were severe. Entire populations were uprooted and relocated through the Mitma system, a policy designed to prevent rebellion and ensure loyalty. Resistance leaders were deposed, and their people were resettled in distant parts of the empire. This policy wasn't just about punishment. It served a broader purpose by integrating diverse cultures into the Inca state, while breaking any lingering resistance. Conquered lands were often immediately reorganized, with population redistributions and infrastructure improvements, ensuring tighter imperial control. The Incas also excelled in exploiting geography to their advantage, making the most of their advanced road system. Their use of strategic sabotage was particularly clever. If pursued by an enemy force, they would destroy bridges behind them, forcing the enemy into treacherous terrain. This often set the stage for ambushes, where the Incas could neutralize opponents with precision. Their mastery of mountainous terrain meant they always had the upper hand when fighting in the Andes. The success of the Inca military wasn't random. It stemmed from a calculated expansion strategy that combined diplomacy, overwhelming force, infrastructure, and cultural integration. They didn't just conquer territory, they absorbed it, creating a unified empire that transcended the boundaries of individual tribes and regions. Each campaign expanded the vision of the empire while reinforcing its structure, ensuring both short-term victories and long-term stability. With a combination of sacred duty and strategic brilliance, the Inca military transformed South America into one of the most complex and organized societies the pre-Columbian world had ever seen. The Inca Empire was more than just a unified kingdom. It was an intricate, well-organized system known as Tawantinsuyu, which translates to the Land of Four Quarters. This name was not metaphorical. The empire was literally divided into four massive regions, or Suyus, that radiated outward from Cusco, their sacred and political center. These Suyus, Chinkai Suyu to the north, Anti Suyu to the east, Kula Suyu to the south, and Kunti Suyu to the west, were monumental in both scope and design. Each one represented a vast and diverse territory, encompassing thousands of communities and countless ethnic groups. Their borders were not arbitrary. They followed natural landmarks like rivers and mountains, which the Incas considered sacred. Cusco lay at the very heart, serving as the point where all these regions converged, symbolizing unity under the rule of the Sapa Inca. To govern these immense territories, the Incas relied on administrative hierarchy that was both practical and deeply rooted in their worldview. At the top of the system was the Sapa Inca, who wielded absolute power as the divine ruler of the empire. Directly beneath him were the Apus, noble governors appointed to oversee each Suyu. These governors were responsible for not only maintaining order, but also managing resources, taxes, and labor contributions. Beneath the Apus was a meticulous chain of command structured into decimal units, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 households. Each unit had its own local official to ensure that even the smallest community had representation and accountability. This system wasn't limited to paperwork. If anything, it was remarkable because the Incas achieved all of this without a written language. Instead, they used Quipus, an ingenious system of knotted cords that recorded data through patterns of knots and colors. Combined with oral traditions passed down through highly trained specialists, Quipus allowed the Incas to keep track of everything from census data to tribute deliveries. It's no small feat that this method enabled them to administer a population of over 10 million people spread across an empire the size of the western United States. But the divisions of the Suyus had a deeper significance beyond administration. The Incas viewed their empire not just as a political entity, but as a sacred cosmic order. The Suyus represented a kind of spiritual map, mirroring the structure of the world as they understood it. Each Suyu held its own share of sacred sites, known as wakas, as well as its unique blend of resources and ethnic groups. The Incas used this cultural and ecological diversity to their advantage. By redistributing populations through their Mitmakuna resettlement program, they ensured loyalties while spreading Inca culture and language to new regions. Local communities were relocated to areas with rebellious tendencies, embedding stability in even the most distant corners of the empire. Interestingly, the Inca economy operated without money or markets, something unheard of in most advanced civilizations. Instead, the empire depended on reciprocity and redistribution. Farmers, herders, and craftsmen contributed their labor and goods to the state as a form of tax, and in return, the state guaranteed security and resources in times of need. This exchange created an empire-wide safety net, binding the people to one another and to the imperial administration. When people hear about Tawantinsuyu today, they probably imagine Cusco and Machu Picchu, but this imperial system stretched far beyond stone temples. The four Suyus of the Inca Empire were not just regions on a map. They formed the scaffolding of a civilization that blended military precision with spiritual purpose. Each Suyu was like a quarter of a vast sacred mandala, with Cusco, the navel of the world, at its center. This balance between practical governance and divine ideology created an empire that not only expanded across continents, but also endured in the stories and traditions still found throughout the Andes. Quechua, a symbolic thread weaving together the diverse peoples of the Inca Empire, was not originally Inca, but served as the empire's unifying language. The Incas adopted Quechua during their rise to power, recognizing its potential as a tool for control and cohesion. Spoken by communities across the central Andes long before the Incas expanded, it naturally lent itself to the vast terrain of Tawantinsuyu. Once established as the official language, it spread swiftly, reinforced through the empire's schools, centers of education designed to train local elites in Inca ways. This linguistic standardization wasn't just practical, but ideological, erasing divisions between conquered groups and embedding imperial identity across regions. The vast reach of Quechua was unparalleled for a society without a writing system, but the Incas possessed an ingenious answer to that challenge: Quipus. These knotted string devices functioned as the backbone of administrative record-keeping in the empire. At first glance, they seem rudimentary, bundles of cords with colored threads knotted in different patterns. But the quipu was a sophisticated computational tool. Each knot, its placement, and its accompanying string represented precise units of information, from population data to tribute allocations. Quipus didn't operate in isolation. Their meaning existed in tandem with oral traditions, passed down by memory specialists who could interpret them. The individuals responsible for these quipus were known as quipu kamayoks, a specialized class of officials deeply trained in their craft. Though their exact methods remain partially shrouded in mystery, modern researchers have discovered that the quipus encoded far more than numbers. Certain knot arrangements and chord colors may have expressed narrative or phonetic information, hinting that the quipu system was even more versatile than initially believed. If proven, this discovery could redefine how we understand Inca communication, possibly revealing the traces of a symbolic language that bridged the gap between spoken words and physical records. What truly astounded early Spanish chroniclers was the accuracy of the quipu records. Time and again, these knotted strings aligned perfectly with verbal reports, whether they listed the results of an empire-wide census or tallied labor quotas fulfilled through the mita system. This level of precision was achieved without ink, paper, or ledgers, only chords and the extraordinary memory of those who worked with them. In some cases, Spanish officials would compare quipu data against their own written records, often admitting that the Andean system's reliability rivaled their own documents, which depended on quills and parchment. While the quipus represented administrative mastery, the role of Quechua in unifying the empire cannot be overstated. It allowed the Incas to establish consistent communication across an incredibly diverse population of ethnicities, each with its own language, traditions, and customs. By instituting a common tongue, the Sapa Inca could issue commands, mobilize armies, and integrate conquered peoples without requiring interpreters at every level of governance. This linguistic strategy helped dissolve potential resistance and reinforced the image of a singular, omnipresent state. Together, the adoption of the Quechua and the innovation of the quipu were pillars of one of history's most efficient bureaucracies. By relying on an oral culture supported by complex tools, the Incas managed to administer their empire with accuracy and speed. Through these means, they achieved what many other civilizations struggled with, even using advanced writing systems, the ability not just to govern, but to bring about unity in diversity. Even today, Quechua is spoken by millions across South America, and quipus remain a source of fascination, a testament to the ingenuity of the people who once ruled Tawantinsuyu. The Inca Empire spanned some of the most challenging terrain on Earth: sheer mountain ridges, vast deserts, thick forests, But instead of viewing these obstacles as limitations, they turned them into connections. At the heart of their ability to govern such a sprawling realm was Capac, their vast road system that extended over 40,000 kilometers across the Andes. These roads were more than simple paths. They were a network of stone-paved highways, staircases shaped into cliffsides, suspension bridges strung across deep gorges, and tunnels bored through solid rock. Some sections remain remarkably intact today, a testament to their engineering skill and endurance. Building this network required overcoming astounding geographical challenges. In steep mountain regions, roads clung to slopes with terraces supporting their construction. In swampy lowlands, they elevated pathways with stone foundations to prevent flooding. In the harshest high-altitude areas, where oxygen was thin and the cold relentless, the roads still cut through, linking upland communities to fertile valleys far below. Rope bridges, often spanning hundreds of feet across rivers or ravines, were one of their most iconic features. These bridges, woven through grass fibers, were capable of supporting troops, transport animals, and supplies. Incredibly, some of these bridges are still reconstructed annually by Andean villagers, following ancient techniques, preserving a timeless connection to their past. Scattered along the Capac, the Incas established tambos, or way stations. These small settlements served numerous purposes: supply depots for traveling armies, storage houses for food and tools, and rest stops for state officials and messengers. Positioned at regular intervals, they allowed the empire to efficiently move people and goods across enormous distances. These tambos functioned as the logistical backbone of the Inca state, ensuring that no region, no matter how remote, was ever too far from imperial control. To carry messages across this sprawling network, the Incas relied on the Chasquis, their elite relay runners. These men were hand-picked and highly trained, physically conditioned to cover long distances quickly. Working in a relay system, each Chasqui would run for several kilometers before passing his message, a quipu, verbal instructions, or a small object, to the next runner at a checkpoint. Together, this system achieved remarkable speeds. Messages and reports from the farthest edges of the empire could reach Cusco within days, covering distances of over 250 kilometers a day. And these runners operated without the benefit of horses, wheels, or advanced tools, relying solely on human endurance and precision. The speed and reliability of the Inca communication system rivaled and in some cases surpassed that of contemporary European states, which depended on mounted couriers and far less challenging terrain. But Chasquis weren't the only means of communication. In some regions, the Incas supplemented their runners with unique signaling systems: drums, blasts from conch shells, or even flashes of sunlight reflected from polished metal. These methods allowed them to send warning signs or urgent announcements rapidly across areas where physical runners might have been too slow or hindered by natural barriers. This road and communication system wasn't merely a convenience. Its existence cemented the unity of Tawantinsuyu. It enabled swift military response to rebellions, smooth distribution of resources, and unbroken communication between Cusco and its outer provinces. The Capac wasn't just stone and rope, it was political power materialized, binding the people of the Andes into one cohesive empire. Through the roads, Chasquis, and tambos, the voice of the Sapa Inca could reach the edge of the empire, traveling as rapidly as the steep Andean terrain allowed. These pathways, still present today, weren't just about infrastructure, but about creating connection in a land where separation had once seemed inevitable. The Andes are a land of extremes: towering mountains, shifting temperatures, and elevations that would make farming seem almost impossible. Yet the Incas transformed this seemingly inhospitable environment into one of the most productive agricultural systems in human history. Their innovation started with the creation of agricultural terraces, known as Andeans. These man-made steps carved into the mountainsides prevented soil erosion, retained water, and turned steep, rocky slopes into fertile farmland. Each terrace was carefully designed with layers of gravel, sand, and soil to optimize drainage and reduce the risk of landslides. By stabilizing the mountains, the Incas not only expanded their farmland, but also ensured that it would last through generations. What made these terraces even more remarkable was their ability to create microclimates. Depending on the altitude of a terrace, different crops could thrive, adapting to the unique conditions of each level. This allowed the Incas to grow an astonishing range of crops, from maize and cacao leaves at lower altitudes to quinoa and over 3,000 varieties of potatoes in the colder, higher regions. Each crop was carefully matched to its ideal climatic niche, demonstrating a mastery of environmental management. The versatility of the terraces ensured not only food security, but also a steady surplus, which sustained both local communities and the massive empire. Water was another critical factor in this agricultural success. Advanced irrigation systems were essential to keeping the terraces productive, especially in arid or high-altitude regions, where water sources were scarce. The Incas built canals, aqueducts, reservoirs, and intricate stone-lined drainage systems to direct water throughout their farmlands. These systems captured rainwater, diverted streams, and distributed moisture evenly across the terraces. This allowed even the driest regions of the Andes to support crops, ensuring that no part of the empire went to waste. Some irrigation structures, such as those at Tipon near Cusco, are still functional to this day, providing a tangible link to the ingenuity of Inca engineering. Beyond meeting immediate agricultural needs, the Incas approached farming as a science. Experimental centers like Moche reveal how seriously they studied their environment. Moche's circular terraces, which descend into natural depressions in the earth, are believed to have served as agricultural laboratories. Each ring of terraces experiences a slightly different microclimate, allowing the Incas to test how crops grew under varying conditions. This knowledge was invaluable for expanding their empire into new territories with unfamiliar ecosystems. Their sophisticated agricultural planning enabled them to introduce new crops and farming techniques across the diverse landscapes of Tawantinsuyu. One of their most ingenious solutions to food preservation was chuño, a freeze-dried potato product. Made by exposing potatoes to sub-zero temperatures overnight and trampling them during the day to remove moisture, chuño could last for years. This lightweight, durable food became a cornerstone of the empire's economy, especially during military campaigns or periods of famine. By storing large quantities of chuño in state-run warehouses, the Incas guaranteed that their people had an emergency food reserve to fall back on in times of need. Modern scientists continue to study Inca agricultural techniques, particularly their terrace systems, as potential solutions for modern challenges like soil erosion and climate change. For centuries, Andean communities have carried forward these traditions, continuing to farm on the very terraces built by their ancestors. The lessons of Inca agriculture go far beyond simple survival. They showcase a deeply practical yet profoundly innovative system of land management that once fed an empire across one of the most extreme terrains on Earth. Even today, the fields of the Andes echo with their legacy. Inca architecture stands as one of the most striking achievements of ancient engineering, defined by its precision, durability, and harmony with nature. The signature feature of their construction lies in the seamless stonework of their walls, where massive, irregularly shaped stones fit together so tightly that not even a blade of grass can pass between them. This method, called ashlar masonry, involved carefully shaping each stone with bronze or stone tools, remarkable given the hardness of the granite and andesite they often used. Without iron tools, wheels, or draft animals, the Incas relied on sheer human ingenuity to carve, move, and position stones that could weigh over 100 tons. One of the most famous examples of this architectural skill is Sacsayhuaman, a fortress overlooking Cusco. Its massive zigzagging walls convey both strength and elegance, with stones so large that their placement remains a source of fascination. Scholars continue to study how these stones were transported across difficult terrain and lifted into position without cranes or advanced machinery. The fortress wasn't merely a stronghold, it also held ceremonial significance, serving as a key element in the spiritual and political center of the Inca world. Machu Picchu, often described as the crown jewel of Inca construction, showcases not only their architectural prowess, but also their sensitivity to the surrounding environment. Built high in the Andes, this royal estate demonstrates how the Incas combined aesthetic and functional design. Structures align with important celestial events, with windows and corridors designed to capture the solstices and equinoxes. The terraced fields slope down the mountainsides below, proving that even agriculture was carefully integrated into their city planning. Hydraulic systems and drainage canals divert rainwater to avoid flooding and erosion, preserving the site's integrity for centuries. Machu Picchu wasn't just a retreat for the elite, it was an engineered masterpiece built to endure. The Inca understanding of natural forces is evident in their earthquake-resistant designs. In a region prone to seismic activity, they mastered anti-seismic construction techniques long before the science of modern engineering developed. Trapezoidal doorways, slanted walls, and inward-leaning surfaces distributed the force of earthquakes, ensuring that their buildings could absorb shocks without collapsing. Sacsayhuaman and other sites have withstood countless tremors over centuries, some outlasting modern buildings in their resilience. Ollantaytambo, a fortress and ceremonial site, illustrates the full range of Inca engineering projects. Its terraces climb steep hillsides, fortified by towering walls and layers of stone. At the pinnacle, the Temple of the Sun boasts massive monoliths, seamlessly placed, further emphasizing the Incas' ability to balance utility with spirituality. Every angle and feature of these structures appears deliberate, from defensive strength to astronomical alignments marking religious rituals. In addition to their monumental constructions, the Incas revolutionized infrastructure with multi-level terraces, canals, and drainage systems designed to integrate urban centers, agriculture, and sacred spaces. These projects weren't purely functional, they reflected a broader philosophy of living in harmony with the land. Temples and administrative buildings were often situated according to sacred geography, aligning their cities with constellations, mountain deities, and solstices. To the Incas, architecture wasn't separate from their worldview. It was a way of embedding their cosmology into the physical world. The largest stones used in sites like Sacsayhuaman raise particular questions about their transportation. Without wheels or beasts of burden, workers used sledges, ramps, and sheer manpower to move these colossal blocks. Some speculate that thousands of workers coordinated their effort over vast distances, showcasing the scale of Inca organization. Yet, even with such logistical coordination, there remains an air of mystery over how such precision was achieved with seemingly simple tools. The Incas didn't just build for grandeur, they built for permanence, designing structures that embodied their ideology and withstood time. To the modern observer, their work exemplifies not just engineering brilliance, but a deep connection between humanity, nature, and the cosmos, a legacy etched into every stone. Even today, walking through the ruins of Inca sites offers a glimpse of a civilization where architecture wasn't simply functional, but a testament to the divine. The structure of Inca society was an intricate framework of roles and responsibilities, all revolving around the Sapa Inca, who was more than just a ruler. He was considered a divine being. The Sapa Inca was believed to be the direct descendant of Inti, the sun god, and as such, his authority was absolute. The deification of the ruler ensured loyalty, not just through political power, but through spiritual reverence. Beneath the Sapa Inca stood the royal family and the nobility. These nobles were divided into two categories: those of royal blood, closely tied to the Sapa Inca through lineage, and those elevated by privilege, often for their service or loyalty to the state. Together, these elite groups formed the uppermost tiers of Inca governance, overseeing all major decisions related to warfare, administration, and religious duties. Below the nobles, but still pivotal to the empire's operations, were the administrators and priests. Administrators ensured that the Sapa Inca's policies were implemented across the empire's vast territories, often working within the decimal system of organization. Priests, on the other hand, were responsible for maintaining the empire's spiritual health, conducting ceremonies and rituals that reinforced the divine sanction of the Inca state. Their influence extended deeply into daily life, as religion and governance in the empire were inseparably linked. While the elite wielded power, the common people were the backbone of the empire. They fulfilled obligations through their Ayllus by contributing to the mita system, a rotational labor duty. This organized workforce built roads, farmed state lands, and supported military campaigns. Mita wasn't seen as a burden, but as a part of the social contract rooted in reciprocity. Not all individuals fit neatly within this framework. The Yanaconas, for example, stood outside the Ayllu system. Often captured during conquests or deliberately resettled, these people served as permanent laborers, workers attached to temples, or attendants for the nobility. Unlike the rotational nature of the mita, their service was lifelong, marking a societal distinction that reflected both their origins and their roles within the empire. It's crucial to note the roles women played in this intricate hierarchy. While traditional storytelling often focuses on male figures, women were central to Inca life. The aklas, or chosen women, were selected from across the empire for their beauty, intelligence, or skill. After receiving rigorous training in temples, they took on specialized roles as priestesses, weavers, or ceremonial attendants, with some becoming concubines or even wives to the Sapa Inca and the nobility. Their work, especially in weaving fine textiles, a highly prized commodity in Inca culture, was considered a vital contribution to both the economy and the spiritual identity of the empire. One of the more remarkable aspects of this structured society was how effectively it was monitored. Through the use of quipus, the state kept detailed records of demographics, productivity, and labor obligations. These knotted strings weren't just a clever way of collecting taxes or tracking soldiers. They represented an early form of data management that allowed the Inca state to allocate resources precisely and address imbalances across its territory. The sophistication of this system meant the empire had a real-time understanding of its labor force and agricultural output, centuries before modern census techniques would come into play. This carefully balanced social order allowed the empire to function on an extraordinary scale, mobilizing millions for massive agricultural, engineering, and military projects. By tying every aspect of life to the state, through labor, religion, and communal identity, the Incas created an enduring sense of cohesion across an empire that stretched thousands of miles. It was a society driven by intricate organization at every level, one designed to endure both the challenges of the Andes and the demands of imperial ambition. Topa Inca Yupanqui, the son of Pachacuti, took the foundation his father built and transformed it into something monumental. Under his leadership, the Inca Empire reached unprecedented heights, extending its borders to what is now Ecuador in the north and pushing deeper into Chile and Argentina in the south. His reign, which began around 1471, marked a period of relentless military campaigns and strategic integration of new territories. These expansions were not simply about collecting more land, they were about securing dominance over the Andes and creating a seamless empire where culture, economy, and governance flowed across vast distances. One of Topa Inca's greatest conquests was the Chimu Empire, located on the northern coast of modern Peru. The Chimu were known for their advanced metallurgy and control of vital coastal trade networks. Their capital, Chanchan, was a city of sprawling adobe complexes, reflecting their wealth and sophistication. By capturing the Chimu, Topa Inca not only eliminated a powerful rival, but also gained access to their craftsmanship, particularly in gold and silver. These resources, along with their techniques, were absorbed into the Inca state, enhancing its prestige and boosting its economy. But this wasn't just a military victory, it was also a lesson in diplomacy. After subjugating the Chimu, Topa Inca allowed many of their artisans to continue their work, ensuring a smooth transition into Inca rule. Topa Inca's vision extended beyond conquest. He was an administrator as much as a warrior. To maintain control over new territories, he implemented his father's resettlement strategy on an even larger scale. Known as Mitmak'kuna, this policy involved moving loyal populations to areas prone to unrest and relocating rebellious groups closer to the empire's core or to frontier regions where their influence could be monitored. These migrations spread Inca culture, especially the Quechua language and state-sponsored religion, to areas that had once fiercely resisted outside control. At the same time, this system fostered economic integration, ensuring that newly conquered lands were woven into the empire's trade and labor networks as quickly as possible. Infrastructure was another critical focus of Topa Inca's reign. He extended the Inca road network deep into northern territories, building new paths to connect remote provinces with administrative centers. Along these roads, he ordered the construction of additional storage facilities, or colcas, which held surplus food and supplies. These colcas were meticulously placed to support armies on the move and to ensure that no province faced famine. In this way, the roads served far more than transportation. They helped solidify the empire's logistical and political control. Perhaps the most fascinating tale from Topa Inca's reign involves his rumored naval expedition into the Pacific Ocean. According to some accounts, he assembled a fleet of balsa wood rafts and ventured west, returning with stories of distant islands. Some historians speculate that these could have been Easter Island or Mangareva, though others question the historical accuracy of the tale. True or not, this story underscores the imagination and ambition that characterized his rule. In less than 3 decades, Topa Inca Yupanqui doubled the size of the empire, bringing over 80 distinct ethnic groups under Inca control and governing more than 10 million people. This expansion was managed without traditional tools like writing, money, or horses, relying instead on the sophisticated systems of governance and communication developed by his predecessors. Topa Inca not only preserved his father's reforms, but pushed them to new extremes, creating a framework that allowed the empire to function efficiently across immense distances. Topa Inca's achievements set the stage for what would become the pinnacle of the Inca Empire under his son, Huayna Capac. By the end of his reign, the boundaries of Tawantinsuyu stretched farther than ever before, solidifying its place as the most powerful empire South America had ever seen. His legacy wasn't just territorial, but systemic, an empire that could move armies, administer resources, and adapt to the challenges of its diverse landscape. Huayna Capac inherited a vast and thriving empire from his father, Topa Inca, but his ambitions didn't stop there. Under his leadership, the Inca Empire reached its greatest size, stretching over 4,000 kilometers from southern Colombia all the way to central Chile. This massive geographic footprint made Tawantinsuyu one of the largest empires in the world at the time, rivaling even some contemporary Eurasian powers. Expanding the northern frontier became a key focus of Huayna Capac's reign, particularly in modern-day Ecuador, where fertile lands and strategic trade routes offered immense value. To consolidate power in this newly conquered region, he established a second capital at Tumibamba, near today's Cuenca. This city functioned as a regional administrative hub, ensuring his direct influence over the northern provinces, while symbolizing the might and reach of Cusco. One of the defining features of Huayna Capac's reign was his attention to infrastructure. He committed to building major royal estates, extending the Capacnan road system, and constructing new tambos and storehouses in frontier zones. The administrative centers and infrastructure he developed brought previously isolated regions into the imperial fold. Colcas, or storage facilities, were a particular point of focus. Huayna Capac reportedly ordered the construction of over 2,000 colcas in northern regions to ensure military readiness and protection against famine. These facilities allowed the empire to distribute resources effectively, whether to support marching armies or to stabilize provinces during times of scarcity. The logistical precision achieved by this system was astounding for an empire operating without money or sophisticated machinery. Huayna Capac also strengthened the empire's cohesion through strategic policies of diplomacy and governance. Political marriages and the retention of elite hostages were common practices used to secure loyalty among newly conquered groups. By marrying into prominent local families and integrating the children of regional leaders into Inca schools, he effectively neutralized threats of rebellion, while spreading Inca ideology and culture. At the same time, the mita system, a rotational labor tax, allowed Huayna Capac to mobilize entire communities to work on state-directed projects. This ensured that every population under Inca rule contributed actively to the empire's economy and infrastructure, fostering a pragmatic sense of connection and duty across immense distances. Another hallmark of his administration was the refinement of census records and legal systems. Using Quipus, imperial administrators collected detailed information about population sizes, labor resources, and tax obligations at a level of precision that impressed even the Spanish invaders decades later. Historians credit Huayna Capac with codifying key laws that streamlined governance across the empire's diverse cultures. These reforms not only improved efficiency, but likely played a role in maintaining internal stability during his reign, despite the challenges of ruling over such a vast and varied population. Communication under Huayna Capac further exemplified the empire's effectiveness. The Chasquis relay system, which utilized elite runners, could deliver messages from Cusco to the farthest reaches of the empire in just days. A runner carrying a quipu, or oral message, could travel over 1,500 kilometers between Cusco and Quito in less than 5 days, an astonishing logistical network, considering the empire lacked horses or wheeled transportation. The ability to react quickly to crises or coordinate military efforts across these distances cemented the Inca Empire's reputation as a well-oiled machine. Despite these advancements and the relative prosperity of his reign, Huayna Capac's death marked a turning point for the empire. During his time in the north, he likely contracted a disease introduced by Europeans, possibly smallpox, which had begun to spread ahead of the Spanish themselves. His sudden passing triggered a power vacuum and a bitter succession dispute between his sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar. This internal conflict weakened the empire at a time when external threats were already looming. The golden age of the Inca Empire under Huayna Capac was as impressive as it was fleeting, its achievements soon overshadowed by the turmoil that followed. Around 1525, unseen tides of destruction swept across the Inca Empire. A disease, likely smallpox, tore through the population with unprecedented speed and severity. It arrived long before Spanish conquistadors set foot in the Andes, moving silently along the trade and tribute routes that formed the arteries of the empire. The Incas, without any prior exposure to Old World pathogens, had no immunity. Within a short span, the epidemic claimed a devastating toll, including the empire's most crucial figure, Huayna Capac, and his chosen heir, Neo-Inca. Their deaths came within weeks of each other, leaving the empire without a clear line of succession during a moment of unparalleled crisis. The timing of this epidemic couldn't have been worse. With both the emperor and his intended successor gone, the question of leadership immediately plunged the empire into turmoil. Ambition and rivalry flared between Huayna Capac's surviving sons, Atahualpa and Huáscar, both of whom claimed the throne. This succession conflict would soon spiral into a civil war that tore the empire apart. But even as the political situation disintegrated, the epidemic continued its relentless spread, ravaging the population and infrastructure that had once held Tiwanaku and Suyus together. The impact of the disease went far beyond the deaths of Huayna Capac and Neo-Inca. Entire swaths of the empire's intricate bureaucracy were wiped out. Administrators, priests, and Quipus Kamayokes, those who maintained official records using knotted string quipus, were lost on a massive scale. These figures were not interchangeable. They carried with them vital knowledge of local economies, labor obligations, and religious ceremonies. As they succumbed, the administrative machine of the empire began to falter. Without their guidance, even simple tasks like organizing tribute or redistributing food supplies became increasingly difficult. As the bureaucratic structure weakened, the previously centralized empire became fragmented. The effects were perhaps most devastating at the community level. The Ayllu system, the foundation of Andean society, crumbled in many areas. Ayllus were tightly knit extended family groups responsible for farming, herding, and contributions to state projects via the Mita labor system. When entire Ayllus were wiped out, not only did labor forces disappear, but so did the communal memory and rituals that provided order and meaning in daily life. Fields went untended, terraces fell into disrepair, and the social fabric that had united millions began to unravel. Some regions saw population losses so extreme that up to 90% of inhabitants perished within a single generation, a demographic collapse without precedent in the Americas. In the absence of scientific understanding, the Incas viewed the disease through a spiritual lens. They believed it to be a divine punishment, possibly brought on by angered gods or improper rituals. This interpretation deepened societal confusion and despair. Priests, who were often the ones called upon to intercede with the gods, were dying just as rapidly as the people they served. Without their spiritual leaders, many communities were left isolated and directionless. The same empire that had once woven its identity around centralized strength now found itself rudderless. What made the epidemic all the more devastating was what followed. The chaos left in the wake of the disease perfectly set the stage for the Spanish invasion. When the Spanish finally arrived, the Incas were still reeling from their losses. Thousands of communities were leaderless and disorganized, and the civil war between Atahualpa and Huáscar had further drained the empire of resources and unity. Smallpox, along with other diseases such as measles and influenza, had effectively done much of the Spaniards' work for them long before they marched into Cusco. Historically, the spread of smallpox and similar diseases across the Americas is often treated as background to the Spanish conquest. But for the Incas, the epidemic was not just a backdrop, it was the earthquake that shook an empire to its core. The collapse of leadership, combined with the weakening of infrastructure and the decimation of the population, created an unparalleled vulnerability. In less than a generation, the Incas had gone from a model of centralized control to a fragmented society struggling to hold itself together. Disease had become one of the most catastrophic weapons unintentionally wielded against the largest empire South America had ever seen. When Huayna Capac died unexpectedly, it sent shockwaves through the Inca Empire. His death came with a second equally devastating blow. Ninan Cayuchi, his intended heir, also perished soon after, likely from the same mysterious sickness sweeping through the land. Without a clear successor, the empire, which had been stable under Huayna Capac's rule, suddenly spiraled into uncertainty. Two of his surviving sons emerged as rivals for the throne. Huáscar, the son born of Huayna Capac's sister, had the strong backing of the traditional Inca elite in Cusco and claimed the right of legitimacy. Atahualpa, however, commanded loyalty in the north, where Huayna Capac had spent much of his reign, cementing his own power base among key northern factions. What began as a rivalry quickly escalated into a full-blown war. Huáscar demanded that Atahualpa submit to his authority as the Sapa Inca, but Atahualpa outright refused. Geographic and cultural fault lines split the empire almost in two. Cusco had long been the heart of Inca power and religion, but the north, with regions like Quito and Tumibamba, had grown strong under Huayna Capac's extended campaigns and administration. This fracture now determined the loyalties of entire provinces and armies. Both sides began rallying massive forces, drawing thousands of men from their respective Ayllus to fight. Atahualpa, though not immediately in the position of strength, commanded the strategic genius of two of his most trusted generals, Chalcuchimac and Quizquiz. These military leaders orchestrated a brutal series of campaigns against Huáscar's armies. One by one, Huáscar's forces suffered crushing defeats. Despite his initial advantages in the south, Huáscar was unable to sustain control, and eventually, his forces collapsed. After a decisive battle near Cusco, Huáscar himself was captured, a humiliation that solidified Atahualpa's status as the new Inca ruler. Huáscar's imprisonment marked the end of the war, but also the tragic climax of a conflict that had weakened the very roots of the empire. The toll of this civil war was catastrophic. Fields lay uncultivated, terraces collapsed from neglect, and the roads once alive with Chasquis and traders now carried only armies and supplies. By the end of the conflict, it is estimated that more than 100,000 soldiers and civilians had died. The imperial infrastructure, so vital for the Inca administration, strained under the weight of this destruction. Provinces that had once contributed generously to the Mita system were left depopulated or unwilling to cooperate with new demands. Worse still, animosity lingered between the northern and southern factions of the empire, deeply dividing communities that had once functioned under a unified identity. While Atahualpa emerged victorious, his moment of triumph was short-lived. North of the empire's borders, Francisco Pizarro and his men were steadily advancing, bringing with them ambitions of conquest and unimaginable threats. A small but cunning group, Pizarro's expedition seemed insignificant at first glance, especially to an empire accustomed to large-scale military campaigns. Yet some Inca nobles began considering these strange foreigners as potential allies. They saw in the Spanish a chance to tip the scales further in their favor by using them as mercenaries or tools against their internal enemies. This gamble, however, would backfire spectacularly. Atahualpa's victory ironically placed him in direct contact with the Spanish at the worst possible moment. When civil war broke out, he had been in Quito, re-establishing control over Huayna Capac's former administrative zones. Now, with the south of the empire subdued, he journeyed to the town of Cajamarca to consolidate power and planned for his coronation as the uncontested Sapa Inca. Instead, he found himself face to face with Pizarro's forces, unassuming in size, but armed with weapons and tactics completely unlike anything the Incas had faced before. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro, the ambitious Spanish conquistador, made his fateful landing along the northern coast of Peru. He brought with him just 168 men, a force that seemed almost absurdly small to conquer the greatest empire in the Americas. Yet the timing could not have been more favorable for Pizarro. The Inca Empire, once a model of centralized control and unity, stood fractured. The civil war between Atahualpa and Huáscar had left its people divided, its armies fatigued, and its infrastructure reeling from neglect. Disease, believed to be smallpox, introduced by earlier European contact in Central America, had ravaged the population even before Pizarro's arrival. What Pizarro stepped into was not the Inca Empire at its height, but an empire already staggering under the weight of its own crises. Before this moment, Pizarro was hardly a stranger to the Peruvian coastline. Several years earlier, he had led expeditions probing the territory, hearing tantalizing rumors of unimaginable wealth lying deeper inland. Tales of gold, silver, and an advanced civilization fueled his determination. Securing royal backing from the Spanish crown, he set sail once more with a clear objective: conquer this mysterious empire. Pizarro's strategy, even before landing, was deliberate. He used previous encounters with indigenous peoples to refine his tactics, ensuring that diplomacy and deception would complement brute force. This approach had worked in earlier Spanish conquests, and he intended to use it again. The Spaniards began their inland march toward Cajamarca, a small but crucial town in the northern Andes where Atahualpa was stationed. Atahualpa, flush with confidence after his victory over Huáscar, was taking part in traditional ceremonial retreat with thousands of his troops nearby. Though informed of the Spaniards' arrival, he viewed them as little more than an oddity. The Incas had never encountered horses, steel weapons, or firearms, nor had they ever faced opponents like the Spanish, whose armor made them nearly impervious to the traditional arms of the Andean fighters. These stark technological contrasts weren't just practical advantages, they carried a psychological weight. Many Inca warriors reportedly believed the Spaniards' horses were creatures fused with their riders, or that their cannons were supernatural thunder. As Pizarro approached Cajamarca, he keenly observed the dynamics of the Inca leadership. The power vacuum left by the Civil War, paired with Atahualpa's short reign, played perfectly into Pizarro's plans. Atahualpa had consolidated power in the north, but his rule still lacked the unquestioned authority that would have characterized a more established Sapa Inca. Pizarro ensured his initial interactions were framed as diplomatic overtures rather than overt threats. The Spanish formally requested an audience with the emperor, gaining access to his seemingly impenetrable position with surprising ease. The Spaniards were not only fearless, but also deeply impressed by what they encountered during their march. Inca roads, the famed Capac, stretched before them, impeccably built without the use of wheels or draft animals. These highways, paired with suspension bridges spanning deep gorges, left the Spaniards marveling at engineering achievements they compared to the finest works in Europe. Despite their awe, Pizarro and his men remained focused, continuously preparing themselves for the inevitable confrontation. The defining moment came when Atahualpa agreed to meet Pizarro's delegation in Cajamarca's main square. What happened next proved to be one of history's most infamous turning points. Using a mix of guile and overwhelming shock tactics, the Spaniards ambushed the Inca forces. Steel swords and horses tore through Atahualpa's unarmed attendants, while musket fire created chaos among the people unfamiliar with such weaponry. Despite being outnumbered by thousands, Pizarro's forces captured Atahualpa himself, an act that shattered the Inca chain of command in an instant. Astonishingly, not a single Spaniard was killed during the ambush. This watershed event marked the true beginning of the Spanish conquest. The largest empire in the Americas was reduced to a precarious state in mere hours, its fate decided not on the battlefield, but within a trap set by 168 Europeans. Pizarro's victory at Cajamarca revealed the stark vulnerability of an empire built on centralized authority, an authority that, in this case, was now in Spanish hands. The emperor of the Inca Empire had gone from ruler to prisoner, and the collapse of centuries of Inca governance was set in motion. On November 16, 1532, Atahualpa met Francisco Pizarro and the Spanish in the Plaza of Cajamarca. The day began like many others in the emperor's life. He was confident, relaxed, and utterly unaware of the danger that awaited him. Emerging victorious from the civil war with Huáscar, Atahualpa saw no threat in a small band of foreigners, no matter how strange their appearance. He arrived surrounded by hundreds of attendants, unarmed and seated on a ceremonial litter, intending to assert his authority. The plaza, however, was empty of civilians and bustling markets. Pizarro's men had transformed it into a trap, hiding cannons and soldiers in the surrounding buildings. What seemed like a formal meeting quickly turned into a meticulously planned ambush. When the Spanish friar Vicente de Valverde approached Atahualpa with the Bible and demanded he convert to Christianity and accept the rule of the Spanish crown, the emperor refused. In Inca culture, rulers were considered divine intermediaries for the sun god Inti. To Atahualpa, the suggestion of submission was incomprehensible, and the act of handing him a Bible bore no significance. Accounts differ on whether he cast the Bible aside or simply dismissed it, but Pizarro seized the moment to act. He signaled his men, and chaos erupted. Spanish cannons fired into the crowd, shattering the air with noise unlike anything the Incas had ever encountered. Mounted soldiers charged, steel swords flashing in the sunlight. Panic gripped the unarmed attendants, who were unable to defend themselves effectively against the heavily armored Spanish forces. Within hours, hundreds of Atahualpa's followers were dead, and the emperor himself was in Spanish custody. While the devastation was severe, it wasn't the sheer force of arms that paralyzed the Incas. It was the capture of their divine ruler. To the Andean people, the emperor was not just a political figure, but the sacred cornerstone of their society. The notion that he could be physically taken by outsiders defied all belief. Once in captivity, Atahualpa quickly grasped the seriousness of his situation and sought to buy his freedom. He made an extraordinary offer to fill a room measuring about 22 feet by 17 feet with gold up to a height that he could reach, and to do so within 2 months. Additionally, 2 smaller rooms of silver were promised to accompany the treasure. Gold and silver, while valuable to the Spanish, held sacred meaning for the Inca. Gold was considered the sweat of the sun, a connection to Inti that touched every aspect of their culture and faith. Despite the spiritual loss, Atahualpa's followers carried out his orders, and over the following months, caravans brought the treasures to Cajamarca. Jewelry, statues, and ceremonial items melted down as mere booty by the conquistadors. Even after receiving the ransom, the Spanish distrusted their captive. Atahualpa was aware of their intrigue and continued directing his loyalists, including ordering the execution of Huáscar to eliminate him as a bargaining chip for the Spanish. These actions only deepened suspicion among Pizarro and his men, who feared rebellion if they allowed Atahualpa to live. So, in July 1533, the Spanish charged him with crimes of treason and idolatry, accusations that were fundamentally alien to the Inca worldview. The verdict was predetermined. Atahualpa was sentenced to death by burning, a fate that denied him his sacred burial rites and proper passage to the afterlife. At the last moment, he agreed to be baptized to avoid the flames, a symbolic gesture more about survival than genuine conversion. Atahualpa's death shattered what remained of Inca authority. Nobles were thrown into disarray, and the infrastructure that tied the empire together quickly unraveled without leadership. Meanwhile, the Spanish used the power vacuum to install puppet rulers, figures who could lend the illusion of continuity, while the real power shifted to colonial hands. In Cajamarca, the room that once housed the ransom remains, standing silent as a relic of transaction that could not preserve the life of the last true Sapa Inca. After the execution of Atahualpa, Pizarro wasted no time pressing southward toward Cusco, the empire's spiritual and administrative heart. Along the way, the Spanish force swelled with the addition of indigenous allies, groups who saw an opportunity to break free from Inca domination. These alliances were crucial. For many subjected peoples, the Inca had long been conquerors themselves, extracting tribute and labor through the far-reaching Mita system. Resentment simmered in regions where the Inca had displaced entire communities or imposed harsh control. Now, with the fall of their central authority, some of these groups seized the moment to align with the Spaniards, bolstering Pizarro's ranks and easing his path through the Andes. By November 1533, the Spaniards arrived at Cusco. Despite its role as the empire's beating heart, filled with treasures, sacred sites, and the highest echelons of Inca leadership, Cusco offered relatively little resistance. The city's leaders were fractured, demoralized by Atahualpa's death and the chaos that had followed the Civil War. Many nobles still clung to the belief that these strange foreigners might be fulfilling ancient prophecies. Among these was a tale of bearded gods who would arrive to bring transformative change. This deeply ingrained idea caused hesitation when decisive action was most needed and allowed the Spaniards to enter the city with ease. Once inside, the Spanish quickly turned their attention to one of the most sacred sites in the entire Inca world, Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. This temple, dedicated to Inti, symbolized the empire's core spiritual beliefs. Its walls, famously adorned in gold, reflected the divine energy of the sun and emphasized the Inca ruler's celestial connection. For Pizarro and his men, the temple's riches represented untold wealth, something to be stripped and shipped back to Spain. They looted Coricancha, tearing down its gold plating and seizing invaluable artifacts. This wasn't just material, it was a catastrophic blow to the spiritual identity of the empire. The desecration of Coricancha signaled that no aspect of Inca life was beyond Spanish reach, leaving an indelible mark on those who witnessed it. Having secured Cusco, Pizarro sought to stabilize his conquest by installing a puppet emperor. He chose Manco Inca Yupanqui, a young noble who initially cooperated with the Spanish in hopes of preserving some semblance of traditional rule. Manco Inca served as a familiar figure to the people, a symbol of continuity, albeit one stripped of actual power. But even this veneer of legitimacy couldn't prevent the systematic dismantling of the empire's governance. The Spaniards introduced their own systems, forced Christianization, encomiendas, and colonial taxation. Under encomiendas, indigenous communities were effectively enslaved, their labor and resources redirected to enrich their new rulers. Ancient systems of reciprocity and communal labor were replaced by structures of exploitation, eroding the societal bonds that had sustained Tawantinsuyu. The Spaniards' transformation of Cusco wasn't limited to governance. They built churches, mansions, and colonial structures directly atop Inca foundations, a symbolic act of dominance over the Old World. This architectural layering, still visible today, reveals the silent yet persistent memory of what came before. The very stones used in Inca temples now supported foreign edifices, a physical manifestation of conquest and erasure. Interestingly, many Inca nobles believed, at least initially, that the Spaniards might be divine or predestined. This belief delayed large-scale resistance, leaving Cusco vulnerable at a critical moment. But the fall of the city was not merely the loss of a political center. It marked the collapse of an entire worldview. Cusco had been more than a capital, it was a cosmic axis, connecting the physical, spiritual, and celestial dimensions of Tawantinsuyu. With its fall, the heart of the empire stopped beating, and the world that the Inca had built unraveled, leaving only fractured echoes of its former self. Manco Inca Yupanqui's early days as a ruler were far from glorious. After the Spanish installed him as a puppet emperor in the wake of Atahualpa's death, he appeared to play along with their demands. Underneath this cooperation, however, was growing frustration and anger. The Spanish were not content to hold authority quietly. They humiliated Manco, treating him as little more than a figurehead. According to accounts, he endured public insults and outright abuse, including a particularly degrading moment where Spanish soldiers reportedly stole his wife and mocked him openly. For someone in his position, once destined to inherit the divine role of Sapa Inca, this treatment was not only a personal affront, but a disgrace to his people's traditions. The humiliation pushed Manco to the point of action. In 1536, Manco turned on his captors. He escaped their clutches and rallied tens of thousands of loyal Inca warriors for an uprising. His forces surrounded Cusco, laying siege to the city for nearly a year. This was no small rebellion. The effort was vast, well-coordinated, and almost succeeded. Manco's men used the mountainous terrain to their advantage, cutting off supplies to the Spanish and attacking them in waves from positions of strength. Dozens of nearby towns, many embittered by years of Spanish cruelty, rose up in support of his cause. At one point, the Spanish were reportedly trapped within Cusco with limited food and no way to escape, narrowly avoiding total defeat thanks to reinforcements from their allied indigenous forces. Despite these successes, the siege ultimately stalled. Spanish weaponry, specifically their firearms and mounted units, proved deadly in counterattacks, and their alliances with indigenous groups that opposed Manco weakened his overall support. Supplies ran thin, and the Spanish eventually regrouped. Manco's forces couldn't hold the siege indefinitely, forcing him to retreat. But rather than surrender, he escaped into the dense jungles of Vilcabamba, a remote region surrounded by treacherous terrain, where Spanish forces would struggle to follow. There, he established the Neo-Inca state, a small but resilient stronghold that was as much symbolic as it was strategic. Vilcabamba, hidden deep within the Andes, became the last bastion of Inca resistance. Manco and his successors operated from this base for nearly 40 years, keeping the flame of Inca sovereignty alive even as the rest of the empire crumbled under colonial rule. The Neo-Inca state was not just a sanctuary for political resistance, it was also a cultural lifeline. Within its borders, many of the old rituals and traditions were preserved. Inca rulers continued to hold ceremonies, maintain noble bloodlines, and govern according to their ancestral customs, even as the broader world was forcibly Christianized. Though diminished in scale, Vilcabamba became a symbol of defiance. Manco's forces engaged in guerrilla warfare, harassing Spanish positions and refusing to allow complete consolidation of power in the region. This resistance delayed Spanish domination, forcing authorities to reckon with the stubborn corner of the Andes that refused to fall. What made this even more remarkable was the fact that Vilcabamba's location remained a mystery for centuries after its fall. Not until the early 20th century would archaeological expeditions rediscover its remains, uncovering a piece of history that had been almost completely buried by time. Manco himself became a proto-revolutionary figure in the centuries that followed. His leadership inspired not just contemporaries, but also later indigenous uprisings. Rebels such as Túpac Amaru II in the 18th century look back at figures like Manco as symbols of resilience in the pursuit of justice. Even as the Neo-Inca state eventually fell to Spanish forces in 1572, it proved that Inca defiance could endure far longer than anyone had predicted. It was a stunning reminder that while the empire's golden age had passed, its spirit remained alive, tucked away in the uncharted jungles of Vilcabamba, and in the hearts of those who refused to give up its legacy. Túpac Amaru, the last ruler of the Neo-Inca state, became a symbol of perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. Following decades of resistance, Vilcabamba, the jungle stronghold established by Manco Inca, remained the final bastion of the Inca Empire. From this remote fortress, Túpac Amaru continued to oppose Spanish control, ruling over a small but defiant faction. While the Spanish tightened their grip across the Andes, Vilcabamba stood as a stubborn reminder of the former empire's resilience. However, by the 1570s, the Spanish crown grew increasingly intolerant of this pocket of rebellion. Viceroy Francisco de Toledo, determined to extinguish all remnants of Inca resistance, launched a full-scale military campaign to crush Vilcabamba once and for all. In 1572, Spanish forces invaded the Neo-Inca state with overwhelming numbers and superior weaponry. Túpac Amaru's followers fought fiercely, using their intimate knowledge of the jungle terrain to slow the Spanish advance. The dense rainforest, treacherous mountain paths, and lack of clear roads made the campaign both arduous and dangerous for Toledo's soldiers, but the Spanish pressed forward relentlessly. Despite the resistance, Vilcabamba's defenses eventually broke. Faced with the full might of Spanish military power, the Inca forces could not hold their ground indefinitely. The fall of Vilcabamba sealed the fate of the last independent Inca stronghold. Túpac Amaru fled deeper into the jungle to escape capture, taking only a small group of loyal followers with him. But the paths that had once sheltered his ancestors now betrayed him. Spanish soldiers, skilled in tracking their prey, eventually found him hiding in the wilderness. Isolated and outnumbered, he had no choice but to surrender. Túpac Amaru was taken to Cusco, where the Spanish prepared to make an example of him. His capture wasn't just a military victory, it was a calculated political message. By bringing the last Inca ruler to the city that had once been the heart of Tawantinsuyu, the Spanish sought to cement their dominance, symbolizing the triumph of their rule over the fallen empire. Túpac Amaru was paraded through the streets under heavy guard, a sight meant to cow any lingering aspirations of rebellion among the Andean people. On arrival, he was charged with inciting insurrection and practicing idolatry, offenses that the Spanish authorities used to frame their conquest as both a political and religious crusade. The trial was a formality, its outcome was predetermined. On September 24, 1572, Túpac Amaru was publicly executed in the main plaza of Cusco. He was beheaded while a crowd of indigenous onlookers watched, a deliberate and theatrical display of Spanish supremacy. To the Andean people, however, this act was more than the death of a single ruler. Túpac Amaru represented the final connection to the divine Inca lineage. His death severed the symbolic link between the living empire and its spiritual foundation, leaving a void that resonated deeply among his people. The execution marked the official end of the Inca royal dynasty, delivering the last blow to what had once been the most powerful civilization in South America. Túpac Amaru's legacy, however, did not end with his death. His name would inspire future generations, resurfacing centuries later as a rallying cry for indigenous resistance. In the 18th century, Túpac Amaru II, claiming descent from the Inca rulers, led a large-scale rebellion against Spanish colonial authorities in Peru, echoing the defiance of his namesake. Even further into modern history, the name Túpac Amaru would live on, most famously adopted by the rapper Tupac Shakur, whose mother named him as a tribute to the Inca leader. These connections highlight how the story of Túpac Amaru transcended time, evolving into a symbol of rebellion and cultural pride. Despite the Spanish intent to erase Inca legitimacy, whispers of the royal bloodline's survival persisted for centuries. In Andean villages and remote mountain communities, tales spread of hidden descendants still carrying the sacred lineage. These legends, though unverifiable, fueled hope and resistance, shaping a narrative of resilience that defied colonial erasure. For many, Túpac Amaru's death was not just the loss of a ruler, but the twilight of a world that had once stretched across the Andes and governed millions. It was an end, but not a silence. His memory ensured that the spirit of Tawantinsuyu lived on long after the conquest. The fall of the Inca Empire didn't mean the end of its influence, far from it. In fact, the legacy of the Incas remains alive in many forms, shaping the Andes and its people even today. Perhaps the most visible continuation of the Inca heritage is the widespread use of Quechua, the language of the empire. Once promoted by the Inca rulers to unify Tawantinsuyu's vast and diverse population, Quechua survives as the most widely spoken indigenous language in the Americas. It is not a relic of a distant past. Millions of people across Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and even parts of Colombia and Argentina use it daily at home, in markets, and even in modern literature and education. For many, it is a living connection to their ancestors. Beyond language, Inca agricultural practices have left an enduring mark. The iconic terrace farming techniques developed by the Incas remain vital, especially in the highlands, where steep slopes make traditional farming nearly impossible. These terraces do more than create arable land. They prevent soil erosion, manage water distribution, and produce enough for survival even in challenging climates. In many rural Andean communities today, these ancient techniques are still practiced, often with little change from the original methods. They are particularly significant now as farmers adapt to shifting weather patterns caused by climate change. Irrigation systems originally designed by the Inca are still functional in some areas, a testament to the ingenuity and practicality built into their infrastructure. The physical traces of Inca greatness also persist in their architecture. In cities like Cusco, colonial structures sit directly atop Inca foundations, blending two eras of history within a single cityscape. The Spaniards recognized the exceptional quality of Inca stonework, and instead of dismantling it, they chose to build on it. Streets like those around Coricancha, once a symbol of divine power, are lined with walls of precisely cut stones, so expertly fitted that not even a blade of grass can pass between them. The stories these stones tell are not just about engineering, they reveal resilience. The Inca foundations have withstood numerous earthquakes over the centuries, far more effectively than many colonial structures built on top of them. In culture and religion, too, Inca traditions have endured, often reinvented under the influence of Christianity. Modern Andean festivals frequently blend Catholic symbols with Inca rituals, creating a fusion that preserves both belief systems. Inti Raymi, originally a sun festival honoring Inti, still occurs in Cusco every June. Though adapted over centuries, its essence remains deeply rooted in Inca cosmology. Similarly, dances and ceremonies across the Andes echo the ancient rhythms and practices of a civilization that once saw its rulers as divine intermediaries between humans and gods. One of the most fascinating holdovers from Inca society is the concept of Ayni, or reciprocity. This principle, foundational to Inca governance and daily life, still governs work and trade in many Andean villages. Ayni emphasizes mutual obligation. When one person helps another, that help is expected to be repaid in kind. It creates strong social bonds and fosters a sense of community responsibility. Whether building homes, harvesting crops, or sharing food during festivals, Ayni can be seen as a continuity of Inca values in action, emphasizing a collective strength over individual gain. Even the empire's genetic legacy remains visible today. Modern genetic studies have confirmed that many Andean communities share markers that trace back to the Inca rulers, including those found in royal mummies. Ties between past and present are not just cultural, but physical, written into the DNA of living descendants scattered across South America. These connections deepen the understanding that the Inca story was not erased, it evolved, surviving calamity and conquest. The Inca Empire may have collapsed centuries ago, but its legacy is woven into the Andes. From the terraces that still feed communities to the language that carries the rhythms of the past, the empire's presence lingers in ways both profound and practical. It wasn't an ending, it was a transformation, one that continues to guide identity, resilience, and cultural memory in the heart of South America. The Incas built a resilient empire through innovation, unity, and deep respect for tradition, thriving in the unforgiving Andes. Their legacy lives on in the terraces still cultivated today, the road systems that echo in modern infrastructure, and the Quechua language spoken by millions. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started with stories that shaped the world.